bit. Just say something and I'll pause and try to answer that. So this is, I'm dedicating this to Mr. Kitty, who unfortunately is no longer with us. We actually had to, he got really sick recently, so he was on my mind while I was doing some of this. All right, so this is about building apps and then profit, right? So, and this is the consulting aspect of it, is you build the apps and then stuff happens and then you get profit, right? So what I want you to know is, like, this is not the truth. You know, this is not the way it is. It's just my version of it, and you know, just take it for that as it's one person's version. But what I really encourage you to do is to kind of make your own path for it. There's not like one rule applies to everybody. There's probably pieces from this you can be like, yeah, I can use that, and other parts would be like, nah, that doesn't fit, and that's totally fine because this is just my version and how I've done it. So, and what I want you to do is to figure out like what works for you if you're going to do any of it. So my background, I was trying to figure it out, and it was actually super hard because you know, I'd be consultant for like part of the year, but then I'd change halfway through. So like from 2000, it's like, okay, I did full-time consulting from like February and then to 2001 till maybe the March or April. So it wasn't like full years, but I've done probably full-time about 5 years. Sometime during that, it's like either full-time for the whole year or full-time wrapping between the two for a bunch of it. And then I've also been a part-time consultant for most of the time, and even now I still have, you know, some stuff that I've done. I think it depends on like the companies that I'm at, how much time do I have extra. And right now I have 2 kids who are 9 and 10, so I have less time to do that. So I used to take on a lot of stuff and would just do extra stuff during the nights and weekends because it was fun. But now I only have one project that I actually work on. What apps? So this is just, I'm going to show just a couple of things that I worked on as a consultant. So the first one is, this is Kaleidoscape. It's a high-end multimedia system that you buy. I had no idea who they are. It's because like the product that we work on was basically like an Apple TV, except you can only buy it from their store, and the Apple TV would cost $5,000, and the movies are more expensive than what you'd buy on Apple TV. But there's a reason for it, because these are for like 10-foot, you know, high definition, you know, home theater systems with sound, and when you have like this device, the quality of it, it's, you know, for them it's actually worth it. But that's like, I had no idea who they were. But I built this app. Most of the stuff on here I did with another friend of mine. The second one was for consulting through the Upper Room. They ended up doing, they had a prayer app that they were doing that I think they launched, but then ended up not getting as much traction as they wanted. The last one is there's a MIDI keyboard called the Misalu C64. So I was the director of engineering there, but I also wrote the app. And I started off there as a consultant and then got hired full-time on that. The other one is Soma FM. It's a radio station. You go to somafm.com. I write their iOS, Mac, TV apps. And I've been doing that one for a long time. And actually I was a fan of it for a while before that. There's another one called Weagles, which is a gas station. So they had a gas station app where you could get their deals. There's another one called Rebel, which was basically a motion action camera that you would be able to, it's actually pretty neat because you basically be able to attach it, and as you move it around, it actually would stay fixed and smooth on use. It's meant for, you know, like people who are doing kite surfing or surfboarding or any of like the action stuff to be able to do it. And so I wrote some of the initial stuff for them. But ended up, they've turned their business over to doing more just of the AI part of it, or more like learning to, you know, take all this video and pick out the interesting parts of it. Other one, local one, Nashville, it's called Artifon One. And so I actually wrote their settings for it and then also helped them with a bunch of other stuff. And then there's another local company that did probably like 13 apps, and I helped them figure out how to, they're for all different custom home builders, and so the custom home builders basically all wanted their own app, and so I helped them actually figure out how to be able to do it really easy where we could have a template app and then actually be able to put all these out there for them and do customized based on everything without a lot of work. So those are just a couple of ones I've done during that period. So what is freelancing? Well, you're not a full-time employee, so you're usually not getting benefits. You have a client who gives very specific directions most of the time on what they want to do, and then you try to make them happy and give them something for the product. I think, sometimes you can be hired, and the product could be either information that you want to give them, or they need a review of something, or it's coding something. So in this case, we're talking about how to build iOS apps or Android apps or Mac apps. So why do I do the consulting? I really liked it because sometimes I've done it where I'll do consulting work for 50% of my time, and then have an independent project that I'm trying to work on. So it's basically the consulting is funding my own idea that I want to get out there. So rather than taking the risk and just working full-time on mine, it's basically I have the consulting work being able to fund it. And so I've done that for where I've had a game, we're working with a games company, and so we had some of our own stuff that we wanted to build, and so I do consulting for 2 days a week and then games for the rest of it. I've been doing startups for I think 23 years now. And I love startups, and one of the things with startups is many times they're there, and then sometimes they're not there. And so in between those times, you're like, I don't have a job today. I had a job yesterday, I don't have one today. I guess I'm going to go find what else to do. And so I usually do consulting work between those two things, because I like being able to pick the company that I work with, rather than just, I have to go immediately to it. Especially for startups where you want to know more, what are they actually going to build? Are they do they feel like they're going to be successful? Because I've been at a lot, and most of them aren't successful, but that's the life of the startup. So I usually do it between the two startups as a way to basically reduce my burn rate, or still make money while doing it. And sometimes it's gone into, okay, I'll just keep doing this for a while. That's some of the years have been I haven't done anything, and the projects I'm working on are great, and I don't want to give them up, so I'll just keep doing this. So let's talk about finding clients. Because one of the things about consulting is you have to have people who will tell you what to do so you can get paid, right? So let's talk about finding clients. I think because someone had asked about how do you find clients, and one of the things is it really needs to be a broadcast mechanism for a long time of you getting the message out there that this is what you do. At some point, you won't have to do that, and it'll just be everybody coming to you for it. But initially, you have to it's hundreds, not really hundreds, but you have to put out a lot into the world before it actually starts coming back to you. So the first thing is tell everybody you know that you're looking. So if at this meetup here, as you tell people, you could even wear a name tag saying, hey, I do consulting work on iOS. You just tell people hey, this is what I do. They ask you, what do you do? Well, one of the things I do is I do consulting work. If you ever know anybody who needs it, have an issue or thing that somebody needs to do it, you can call me and do that. So it's kind of getting the word out that way. And part of it is, meeting lots of people, because the more people are out there, they might not be the one, but they might know someone who is the one that actually has the project for it. I also recommend going to a lot of different meetups. It's great anyways, because you get to be out there and be social. If you're not on the social aspect, it's definitely hard, so this is where one of the things you might be able to do, if yours isn't going around and meeting individual people, and you find it easier, you can just give a talk and be impersonal. You can give talks so that you get your name out there or people know who you are, and you can give talks about whatever stuff you built or interesting things. And then also, some of it is, writing blogs. That helps too, if people are either looking for it, but it's usually, if you write interesting stuff that people a lot of times want to know how to build, then they might read it, and you can have hey, I'm also available for consulting work. It's another way to actually be able to do it. I think one of the other ones is, be active in whatever channels or community that you're are part of, so that people actually get to know who you are in there. Because if they don't know who you are, they're not going to ever think of you as the person to go do it. And the other one is, this is one I just highly recommend for anyone, is whatever you're working at, be amazing at that current job. Because I've told John Saba, who's here, many times, it's jobs are short, careers are long. And I think I've hired John twice now. I've gotten him laid off from both of them. but we've gotten hired, and I actually hired him for the first iOS development job that he did, which kind of helped him get into that. And the way that I actually knew him was because he actually came to a game developers meetup, and I actually saw him in the meetup go from not knowing anything over the period of 6 months or a year, I forget what it was, to actually building a game and making something amazing and really stick to it. And then he started learning iOS, and they actually saw him doing that. And that's mostly what we're looking for, is like people who you like, willing to work, willing to kind of on their own learn stuff. And so he ended up being a great person to hire for the junior position that we were at. But it never would happen like if he hadn't done good work or hadn't been nice with people. And I'll go through is like a lot of this stuff too is the people that you work with now, they're going to be the people who you either get other jobs from, or they're the ones who move off to this other company and like, oh yeah, man, I wish we had something like, oh, I remember my friend, they used to actually to do that work. What if they're available for it? Or maybe that they're available to just like, we don't have a full-time job, but maybe they could do a little freelance for us on it. And then you can also just start asking people like, hey, I do this, do you know anyone who needs that? But it definitely has to be like broadcast and putting it out there. And that has to be a lot more of what you do before it actually starts getting in there. And then at some point, like, because when I was doing it for a while at the consulting work, at some point, like, I was just getting so many people who would asking me to do stuff that it would be like, I don't have any time for it, let me send you to someone else. I think I added that in somewhere, but if not, I'll say it again. Is referrals. So like, get to know who else is actually doing some of the consulting work, because many times either the project isn't the right fit for them, or the timing doesn't work, and they'll actually want to hand it off. Because I've had a bunch of projects that I've actually handed off. So let's go back to the stuff that I did before. So this one is a friend of mine who I hadn't worked with, but I've known really well and lived with for a while, that ended up, he was a full-time person at Kaleidoscape, and then their iOS person quit, and then they had one person who quit, and they only wanted to do part-time on stuff, and they were going to do this new app, and it happened to be, he's like, hey, and I had been helping him out with just, answering questions about iOS stuff, and he was like, hey, would it work out? Maybe we could actually hire you to do some of it. And so it ended up being great. I ended up, working for them for quite a while. This was through, I can't remember his last name now. It goes by Furf. But he's, someone I met through like a bunch of different other tech meetups, and he had run some, and then, so I knew him from there, and so when they had this project, he's like, hey, we have this, do you want to, work on it and come in and talk to us about it? The Mislu was another friend of mine who ended up being at that company, and they ended up really needing help to kind of manage the aspect of it, and so I ended up doing consulting work initially. They hired me on, and then went full-time with that one. This is also another friend who he just had run it for a while, and I knew him because I had actually listened to the radio station, and he turns out he's friends of a friend. And then at the same point I was like, hey, I need jobs. He's like, well, our iOS developer has been doing stuff for a long time. Would you like to come, do stuff? I was like, I'll happily pay you. I was like, yes, that sounds awesome. And so that was, I think, like 14 years ago, 15. So I've been working on that for ever since. Weagles was, there's another guy, Justin Giles, who I also met at the Game Developers Group. And he's more focused on Android. And so we got together, and at one point, he had been doing both the Android version and the iOS version. And then he was like, hey, how about we actually split it? I'll do the Android version, you do the iOS version. I was like, sounds great. I don't want to do that one, and you don't want to do this one. So works out well. And so that ended up, we actually did a bunch of apps together, because it worked out well to be able to say, hey, we have two people who can work on it. We can do both the apps in the time. And we got to be where we could really crank out through the apps pretty fast. 4 people, so we did that for a lot. Revel was because the other company, Mislu, when they went under, one of their investor was also an investor in Revel, and then basically was trying to hire everybody to come work at Revel. And I was like, no, but I'll actually do some consulting work for you guys. When the Mislu finally ended, and so that ended up working out great. And then I worked for them for a while, and then went away, and then came back to do it again. This one actually, I just cold called them because I saw they had just announced the product and they were doing a Kickstarter for it, and I'd just been off at Mislu, and so I was like, basically sent them all my stuff. I was like, hey, this is what I've been working on. Basically, I've been working on another musical instrument. I've done a lot of the same stuff you've done. Come, can I talk to you? And so it ended up there was somebody I actually talked to and worked. But I just reached out to them. It's like, here's what I'm doing. I sent it to like every avenue I could find to send it to them, through their website, through the emails, through the, all the stuff to get a hold of them. And the last one was also from a high school friend of mine who, was on Facebook and had seen that I had done other stuff and was like, hey, we have some help. We have this one developer who's been really bad. And it ended up being like the developer actually walked away with all their source code for stuff.
What?
Yeah. It was like, we don't have their source code. I'm like, oh my God, how can we not have the source code? Okay, first thing, when I start here, you're going to have it all so you can get it. So that, and they actually had like all the passwords and stuff for some of their things. And they didn't want to turn it over because they didn't want them to know that they were firing him yet. And so I looked at it, and the stuff that they had is like, it's going to be easy enough to just redo what you have, because the stuff you have isn't very complicated. And so it ended up being pretty easy to redo it. But that was like a bad situation going into it. Yeah, so this is the other one I was going to say. But you find other people who are similar to doing what you're doing, and you'll get referrals. A lot of it is like, I mean, when I was doing it, there'd be times where someone would have stuff, and they're like, oh, we want this, it's going to be like 15 hours a week. Like, I have no time to do that right now. Or it's going to be like a 50-hour project, and we need it, in the next month. I was like, I have no time. But I know these 3 other people who I actually like and think, would be good. You can go contact them. And so some of it, it's like, if they seem like a good client, then you can refer them to someone. If they're not, you're like, I don't know anyone else who can work on stuff right now. Sorry. And the last one is like, larger companies, a lot of times, they'll have a need for some specific aspect of it where they don't have enough money to be able to fund a full-time person for it, but they'd like to have someone come in and either do it for a short period or, like, hey, we have this one, we don't have engineers for it, but we want to have someone else come in and either fix it, or it's a real problem, so can you come do that? And that's where it comes in, like, if you know the people who work at those companies and they know that you can do that stuff, then they'll think of you. The other one is you can also specialize in something. So one of the things I ended up doing, not by purpose, but I just learned, and then it ended up going through really well, is Bluetooth. So at Misalu, we did MIDI over Bluetooth. So I ended up reverse engineering how Apple actually did their MIDI over Bluetooth, and then I worked with Apple on their the MIDI special interest group to actually develop the standardized version of it, and so we were the first keyboard that could actually connect over Bluetooth. So I learned a lot in that and did some really neat stuff with advertising and how devices actually talk to each other, which then ended up leading to Revel, because they actually had a wireless device that also had some Bluetooth to be able to set up in, and then led to Subpack, who is another, they make a hardware backpack that you can feel, like it's a big bass, so it's for like when you're playing either video games or stuff. It's basically a backpack speaker that you wear, that when you do it, you actually feel the
like a
sound.
rumble chair.
Huh?
Like a rumble chair.
Yeah, it's like a rumble chair, except it's actually like a jacket.
Got it.
That you wear. And so we tried it, it was really interesting. But so they had a bunch of Bluetooth stuff they needed to do. Same with Bowers and Wilkins. Their app ended up being, needing to do Bluetooth to set up their speakers. Another company, I had no idea who they were because their speakers were way too much for what I could afford. But so their speakers that are out there right now, they're Formation 1 speakers. I designed like a whole Bluetooth protocol of how you actually discover the speakers out there, how you set them up and talk to them. And then it ended up being at Hydro, the same thing too. They had a Bluetooth system, so it ended up being like, I ended up knowing some of the stuff that they actually really needed. So that's one thing you can also do is like specialize in it. So if you have something that you really know and you've done it for a couple of people, there will be other ones who are like, oh, we need that too. And then you'll be able to get stuff from them. The other question, finding good clients. Because many times you find clients, but they're not good. And you really want them to be good clients. And what do I mean by good? Usually for me is like, you ask this question. If you don't ask this question, you're probably going to regret not asking it later at some point. Is like, well, what is your budget for the project? And if they're saying, like, part of it is you want to see, like, do they have a realistic expectation for what they want? It's like somebody says, hey, I want to build a house. Great, I build houses. Like, well, I want to build it for $500. Like, great, go find someone else to build it. It's like, not me. Same thing with apps. Like, if they say, they want $250 for an app, run. And I have had, like, one of the people I asked is like, so what's your budget for it? It's like, oh, well, I could get someone to do it for like $250. It's like, you should go get them to do that, because I'm not doing, what you want for that. But it's a really important part to ask, because it helps sort out the people who really understand. Or you can also figure out like what level of they're doing. It's like, I just have $1,000 I want to spend on it. It's like, okay, well, I think you need to rethink what you're actually doing so that we can kind of set your expectations for being able to do it or not. And then some of it, it's like, hey, it's, we only $2,000, we're doing this project. It's like, I'm not the one who you want to do that for. I know some other people who can do it, because there also are different levels of like consultants and the level of like work that you do. And so sometimes you're like, I can't do that, but I know someone else who is more junior, but they're good and they'll work cheaper for it, and they'll be someone who would be a better fit for what you do. So also, if you get a weird feeling, or if you are made to feel bad in any way, leave right away. Like, stop, end of story. At the end of the meeting, just don't talk to them, do anything else. Like, it is unacceptable to be made to feel bad or to have someone talk any way where you don't feel respected about it. Like, it is not worth anything from that. And even if the middle of it or the project you start finding out like that, just tell them thank you, finish it up, hand it off, and be done with it. It is not worth your mental mind to basically do that, and so don't enable the bad people to be able to do that. All right, so this is the next section, which is hourly versus fixed price. So what is fixed price? It's basically client says, build this. You say, this is the total amount to build this whole thing. They say yes, then you go off and build it, and then you deliver it. That's a very simplified version of it, but it's basically, the key is that they say exactly how much it's going to be to deliver exactly what they want. Hourly, they basically said, we build this. You're like, yeah, I can build that. It's going to be, this amount per hour. And then you start going off and you build it, and then you build parts of it, and then you build them for it, and then it might take, 10 hours, it might take 100 hours. Hopefully you can kind of, even in hourly, you're still going to do some of the budgeting and stuff for it. So with fixed price, one of the things you could also do is like, hey, this is fixed price for doing this set of stuff. You have the specification of what you want built. We're also going to include in there 10 hours for changes. If you have stuff that wasn't known, you'll have 10 hours for that. But then if you go over it, we're going to have to charge you more for it because it wasn't part of the specification. The problem with this fixed price is you really need to have full and complete designs. And I do mean full and complete, because if you're trying to bid on what they want you to build, if you don't have the full and complete, you can't build it. It's like someone saying, I want you to build me a house. Do you have a plan for it? No, but I know what it will look like. I'm like, yeah, but do you have a plan for it? No, but I'm sure it'll work out great. I'm like, okay, this is not going to be a fixed price for your house. They also need, like, when you have it, not just the design, but what happens when you go from one to the other. What are you going to do in this part? What does this mean over here? Is there data? Like, where's that coming from? There's also, in the middle of it, there's no changes in the project. You can't say, well, we're building this one. It's like, you know what? We're not going to do any of this other stuff. We're going to do this other thing. Like, you can't do that in a fixed price. There can be a process where you can renegotiate for, okay, well, we've done this amount of work. Either you pay us for the full amount and we're going to give you what you asked for or not. Also same for like all images and everything else. So a couple examples. This is like one of what you would get for the interactions. This is some of the stuff is like, all right, here, and this is from a while ago, so now you can actually get the same kind of thing in Figma or some of the other online ones where they can actually just give you a prototype and they have the full designs out there. But this was in, when did we work at Handstand, John? Remember?
2012.
2012. So this is in 2012 that we were building this. But basically they had like, and there's an individual like PNG files that we can open up for all of these. Had all the interactions, had lots of descriptions. If you go to the JPEG, some of them would have like the details of what it actually was. We knew exactly where everything was. We also had, here's what all the stuff should look like. Here's what the scrubber bar, here's what all the assets. So we had all the assets, had all the designs, ahead of time. Now that, and even like, here's the exact app. Like, I mean, basically it was a fully built app without the app being there. The funny thing is, this one wasn't, for hourly work. This was, part of a company that we were at. But this is the kind of level that you need for doing hourly work. Another one is similar. This is also around the time, or actually it was earlier, or a little bit later. But this similar kind of thing of where it's like, all right, here's the exact stuff, here's the exact dimensions. You now deliver the same kind of stuff in Figma, but they basically had a lot of like even animations for it. Like, here's what we want it to look like when you animate from one to the other. Here's what this one thing should do. Here's how it should work. Some prototypes of it. And you have to have that in order to be able to bid, like, to figure out how much is it going to take you to do this. And the real answer is like, most don't have it. And this is why, because a lot of people are like, well, do you do fixed price or hourly? Like, I do hourly. I'm happy to do a fixed price, but you kind of have to have that level of stuff. If you don't have that level of stuff, then we can't actually talk about it. So we can do other versions of it. Most people have like a basic idea. A lot of times there's changes in the middle of it. Once you start on one part, you're like, oh yeah, that's really not working, or that doesn't we want to do that. We want to do this other one. You might decide that certain, like, we were doing this one view, but we wanted to spend more time and redo like the colors and all the things aren't on here. We want to redo it. And so for all those, I just recommend doing an hourly rate, unless some of this stuff you can basically say, all right, for a fixed price, I can help you figure out the full designs. For a fixed price of like $2,000 over 2 weeks, I can work with you to help you put together what the full one is, and then we can see if I can bid on it and do it. So that's like, you can do a fixed price for the first part of it, and then decide like, are they able to actually to get the full solution or not. So hourly, you still have to give estimates on things. It actually depends. So for a lot of like smaller companies or smaller people, like individuals that you're doing work for, you do have to give like, okay, this is what you want, this is how much it's going to cost. So you give like estimates for it, and usually like small checkpoints on it. For larger companies, a lot of times they don't need to have the exact like, okay, you have to give me the between 3 hours, is it 3 hours or 3.5 hours for this thing? Like they don't care. They're like, here's what we're building, here's all the tickets and issues for it, and they know like, are they seeing check-ins, are they seeing actual builds, are they seeing stuff move? And if not, then you'll probably get fired soon after that. And so they usually have a lot of trust in delivering on it, so I'm not worried. And they know a lot of times that they know this isn't a 5-hour thing. This is going to be months long. It could be a lot of times for it. And for smaller folks, I usually say try to break it down into like 1K or 3K or something like that of work that you're going to do, so they can have a sense of it. The other thing you can also do is get a monthly retainer. If you're able to get that, it's great. You'll be able to actually get the retainer for it, and usually it's I will work every month for a certain amount of time. I had one where it's like, all right, it was I think 15 grand a month, and it's basically like 7 hours a day, Monday through Friday, total about, or I think it was like 7 hours a week. Sometime around that is like, this is what our expectations are, and we'll do it for 3 months. And it's like, okay, that works for me to be able to do this kind of thing. I can still do stuff after that time, but mostly I was doing that. Whoops. The other one, what do you charge? Some of this I think, you should figure out like, well, what do you need and what do you actually feel like is worth your time on doing? And if you're just starting out, like you haven't done all the consulting, you can start much lower and then basically get some experience. Because mostly the higher value is that you should be able to do whatever it is you're doing faster or more efficient than people who aren't doing that. So if you're very skilled at what you're doing, you should be able to say like, yes, I can build that, I can crank out that app, it'll take me this amount of time, no problem whatsoever. Yes, I'm going to charge you a lot of money because I'm going to do it well, and you're going to have it soon. You can also even tell people like, hey, if you're also starting out, like, hey, normally I charge $75, but right now I'm doing a special rate for the next few months because I'm actually trying to build up clients, so I'm only going to charge you this amount. That can also help with like later on when you come back to them and say, hey, now I'm actually going to raise the rates. I've done stuff for $25 an hour. I've done stuff for $400 an hour. The $25 is when I was like, it was something I really liked. There was this person who I met who, she had this game idea that I really loved, and so I actually was like, okay, you don't have that much money, but I love this idea and I really want to work on it, and this is what your budget is, so I'll do that one. That's fine. I want to work in the budget because I want to work on the project. And then for the $400 one, that was more, they had some really specific Bluetooth documents and some specifications that they needed reviewed and kind of had like, an opinion on how is this, kind of like doing an architectural review of it. So it wasn't for very much time. I would have liked it to have been for like hours and hours, but it was only like, ended up being like, I think 3 hours or something of work. Normally I charge $125 to $150 for most of the stuff that I've done. And it's been that way for a while. And you can probably make, more or less, but I think it also depends on, kind of like what do you want to charge? You can figure out like, well, what do I make as a yearly, like what would I need to in, if I was doing consulting work to be able to make that same salary? You can kind of figure out that way to figure out how much should I charge. I usually do it based on like, well, what is it you need and what do you feel valued at? And then mostly do what works for you. Like if you're getting paid that amount and you actually really like it and it works for you, then do it. So it's mostly like, if you feel good about it and it works, then go for it. Now sometimes he says, I'm too busy, I have too much stuff, everybody keeps asking me for this. My recommendation is to raise your rates. And I recommend, raise your rates until you're not as busy anymore. And then you'll sort out some of the stuff who, either the people who aren't liking or can't pay enough, and you'll have smaller things and more focus, but you're getting paid more. And I know I've talked to Wiley, who's doing this, consulting work for a lot of times. I'm like, no, you just gotta, if you're too busy about stuff, you gotta raise your rates because there's other people who will pay you that rates, and then you can just be doing that work rather than stuff where you feel so busy. You can actually just be doing the stuff you want to do and still have time. Okay, contract. So this is part of when you do consulting work. The first thing about a contract, have a contract. Second thing about it, have, hey, that was good. Yay. We're good until 7:30, so see if I can be done by then. All right, third part is, have a contract. All right, you get the point yet? There's plenty of sample ones you can find out there. I have one I can share for entertainment purposes only. Because I'm not a lawyer, I don't pass anything, but you have to have one. It's a requirement. Do not do any work until you sign something. There's plenty of stuff out there, just don't do it. The basic points of it, this is how much you will get paid. It needs to be in writing, this is how much you get paid. You will do the work. They will own the work once they pay. If you have a contract that basically says those three things, you'd probably be fine if you didn't have anything else in there. There's larger ways of saying this. You can also say stuff of like, okay, if you don't pay, this is what the penalty is going to be. You're going to have to, do some of this. And then there's usually lots of good legalese for, I am doing all this work, but I'm assigning all the stuff that I actually create for this specific project to you. You have all the IP, there's lots of small language like that. I don't recommend, I also like having a contract, because when you start with someone, you say, I have a contract if you'd like to use it. Then you don't get into, they have some contract, which has all these requirements, and you need to sign away all of this, and you can't work with anybody else in the same thing, and you're like, I'm not signing this contract. You can eliminate these whole paragraphs of stuff, otherwise, sorry, we can't do it. And I've had some people who are like, oh yeah, we don't care about that contract. Do you have one you want to use? Like, yes, here. This one's a lot better. Use mine, please. But you have to have a contract, otherwise it's super hard to get paid, and it's super hard to have people actually really, held accountable and agreed to, yes, we are going to do this thing. And if it's just a smaller, even someone who's like, hey, we're just going to do this for, $100, $200 or whatever. If you want to do that, still have a contract, sign it. It's very easy to do, and it helps it be a simple, signature, and you have it in writing for what you're actually going to do. Did you have a question? Or?
Yeah. And do you have clauses in there for firing the client, getting it out of the contract?
No, because most of the stuff I've usually done has been, I don't think I have anything in there. Because a lot of this has been, it's at will, so if they decide that they don't want to do it, then they just have to pay for whatever work has been done. For most of the smaller ones, we just usually do hey, I'm going to do this work. Okay, I've done this work, you now actually have to pay for it. But I don't usually have one, because if I really don't like it, then after whatever I've talked to them about, and then we do that one, then it's hey, I'm going to have to transition off this one. I have this other thing that I'm going to go do. And so then you just don't continue doing stuff with them. I'll talk about that later, how to fire people. Fire clients you don't like. Did that answer what you're... But yeah, I don't have a specific clause in there for that, and I haven't found, because you're also not in the contract, you're not committing that you're going to build it forever. You're just billing hourly for stuff.
I have some previous experience, although I wasn't doing the negotiations, other people were doing it. And
yeah.
It was usually for much larger contracts,
yeah.
Multiple people for really large companies, and then they would always make a point of having we reserve all of these rights to just terminate at any. So like both the client and the contractor had rights to like terminate at any time.
Yeah. I think if you get into larger ones, I'm trying to remember. There's one that I did that they had some more stuff in there about that. Like you'll give 2 weeks notice or this amount of time before, but then you can stop at any point. Same with us. All right. So next whole section, estimations. Now that you're about to build stuff for someone, you got to figure out how long it's going to take you to do it, right? So I highly recommend while you're building your own apps, and hopefully you are building your own apps, or at least you've done other stuff, is to take notes on what you've actually done. Before you spend any time for your own stuff, map it out like you'd be doing for a client. Saying, all right, I'm going to do this whole screen. This is the parts of it. I think this will take an hour. This will probably take an hour and a half. This will take me 2 hours. I have no idea how this is going to take, so make a wild guess on it. And then see how you did. Were you close? Were you like, wow, I was right onto this, and man, that one I was so far off on, and then like try to figure out like why. You can really try to compare and seeing what did you do and what did you mess up at. And sometimes it could be like, oh, I just didn't realize how much was involved in doing, text and multiple fonts and stuff in there at the same time, while doing images. Like there might be some part of it you're like, okay, note to self, if someone ever wants this thing, I've got to make sure to give it a lot more estimation time for it. And many times when you're doing it for hourly clients, it doesn't have to be an exact. The closer you are, the better, but it also doesn't have to be like spot on to the 15-minute or like, oh, this one's going to take me 17 and a half minutes, and I'll bill you for that. So not usually. Usually, you just want a rough estimate to like, okay, is this going to cost me $1,000 or going to cost me $10,000? And if it's going to cost me 10, maybe I want to cut back or change some of it. It's only going to cost me 5. And then usually a lot of times if people are like, hey, how much was this build? Like, do you have any idea? And I usually tell them, the more you have closer to like the designs I showed you, where you have every screen out, the cheaper it will be to build because you've already figured out what you want to build, and you can be able to tell me, and then I can do it faster. But I'm happy to like help you write down like, I want a login screen. Okay, login screen. This is what's going to take. How much time it's going to be? It's probably going to be 2 to 3 hours, depending on what do you have to log into. How much do you want error messages? Do you want to have like people resetting the passwords? Like there's all questions around that kind of stuff. So it usually gets into the complexity and also text input a lot of times of, what are you allowing them to input? Do you need to do validation? That kind of stuff. For estimation, definitely keep breaking it down into as small parts as you can think of that would take you roughly around like half an hour or so, or an hour. So there's things like displaying images. If you have one screen you're looking at, it's like, okay, are there images I'm going to have to display on there or put in? Is it text that I'm going to have to do? Am I going to have to put the text in different fonts? Is it all just one thing of text? Is it a standard button? Is it a custom button? Is it a button that, it looks different, but they want it to behave like when you click it, that it's going to have this other image and do this special animation? Like, those are all questions you want to ask to see, okay, what's it going to be? Do you have special buttons for navigation? Is it just the standard controls? A lot of times in smaller clients, I always say, go for the standard controls. They're a lot cheaper. A lot of times they'll be like, I like that. Yes, we'll go for standard controls. You can have some sets of colors or themes for some of them, but rather than like, I want a custom button for all of it. You can, but to have that custom look in animation, it takes time, and you might not want to do that. And then also, I think this is the other part of like, after you build apps, there's a lot of stuff. When you see stuff, you're like the one app I had, which was the Kaleidoscape with basically like images and then views on stuff. I had already built like, I don't know how many apps that had similar stuff like that. I was like, yeah, this will take an hour for this, 2 hours for this, and then probably another hour to do all this stuff. They're like, it'll do that fast? I'm like, yes, because I've done it before. I know exactly how to do it. I know what framework I can use to build in, to do the list view very easily. Like, it'll take no time to do that kind of stuff. And for a lot of them, they're really surprised. Like, okay, I guess we'll see. And then like I get it done. It's like, okay, it's all done. Like, okay, wow, that was really fast. But yes, because once you do some of the same stuff over, it becomes easier to estimate because it's the exact very similar thing you're just doing over and over again. And then I always let people know that custom takes a lot longer than standard things you do. Don't forget, like if you're starting a new app, there's a lot of stuff that's in that you have to set up, like setting up GitHub, just creating the new app, making sure it's set up on the App Store. What do you do for, actually I didn't cover that at all, but like what do you do for, someone else has their App Store and you need to have, control over to be able to create like provisioning profiles to be able to actually release it. You're going to have to create builds. There's a lot of stuff that goes into it that isn't just like, hey, I'm coding up this screen. And even just, when they want builds to test things out, it can be a lot. Are you going to set up something automatically, like with the new Xcode Cloud? It takes time to make sure it actually works at all. And then if it doesn't, and if it breaks, you're like, oh, now I don't know, what to do with this one. Now I got to spend time on it. So those are things that you end up having to, say this is going to take time. But like the last one, I don't know how many times, like in a new app, submit the build, and then I go to, you upload the build, and you're like, okay, release the external. Like, do you have encryption? Like, oh man, I forgot to put that in there again to let them know that I don't really care and I don't ever want to fill out that form again. I don't know if anybody else has done that. Maybe I just have done enough apps like new that, and I can't tell you how many times like I know to put it in there, but I forget it every time. And it's always like I upload the build. It's the time when you say release to people, and it's like, do you use encryption in this app? I'm like, no, I don't.
Darn it.
And then I go back and put that in. Yes, I don't have to click it again. Bug fixes. Should you charge? Yes, because most of the time bug fixes are usually incomplete implementations or a misunderstanding about what they had, or they weren't communicated clearly. Now, for some of it, it's like if you clearly, like, I really made a mistake, I totally messed that up, then you say, hey, you know what, I'm just going to fix this, don't worry about it, and then you don't actually build it for some of it. There's been some where I've had like an issue with, there's one on one of the apps where they're doing comments and they had some of that, like, we're using a collection view, but each collection view had different height and had some issues, like some of the different fonts. And I just had such an issue with it where it's like, I should be able to do this better than this. I've messed this up, I don't know how many times. So I'm just going to fix it, because it ended up being a lot of time. I made some mistakes in there, and some of it just like it wasn't good. It's like I should really.
Whose mistakes were they, right? By that time, whose mistakes they were,
Yeah, those are my those are my mistakes, and it's also like, it shouldn't take this long, so I feel bad about charging you for something like I should be able to do. But for most of them, it's usually a lot of times it's like you. A lot of times it's you've either forgot to implement it, and if you had implemented it, you would have charged them that amount in the first time anyways to be able to build it. So it's not like, oh, I forgot, you get it for free. It's like, no, it's still part of the implementation part of it. Wild estimates. This is when you estimate something. It's going to take 4 hours. And you're like, okay, I'm 4 hours in. I've not even started it really yet. I have way messed this up, or something like that. I highly recommend, if you start to notice that it's not going the way you think it is, just go talk to the people immediately. Say, hey, I've done this. I've suddenly noticed that this isn't going to be as easy as I thought it was going to be, either because something comes up. And so a lot of times, if you just give them options on it's this part. If we could actually just eliminate this whole thing right here, I could be able to do it easier. It's this, instead of having adjustable, lines, can we just have the same thing for everything? And they'd be like, oh yeah, I don't care about that, and then you're like, whew, okay, that makes it a lot easier for me. But sometimes, I think it's mostly like let the clients know so they can kind of decide what do they want to do. And then also, in the future, either up the hours for it or learn how to break it down better so you can get it into smaller things. Estimating the unknown. Many times people come to you like, I want you to build this. It's either something you haven't done, or they're like, I want you to use this API, and the third-party SDK to do this whole set of things. You're like, I have no idea what that is. So a lot of times, be upfront about that you have no idea what that is, and you can either, say I can do some investigation. You can say, hey, why don't I bill you for an hour or take an hour? I can go do more, and then I can come back and I can give you a reasonable estimate on what it's actually going to be. And especially if they have some custom third-party analytics API that they really need to use and you haven't used it before, there's some learning that you're going to have to do, but you can build them for that because it's a specific thing that they want you to know that isn't like a standard thing. Now if they come to you and say, hey, I want to have a navigation view and I want you to transition between views, you're like, whoa, I don't know how to do that. It's like, well, you should know how to do that if you're building apps. It's kind of like the more stuff that is common that you should know how to do, that's the kind of stuff you should just, go learn on your own and then build them for them. And it can be something too, if you're more junior, there can be a lot of stuff that you don't know, and it's totally okay to, like, when I was first doing some of the stuff, it's like, I think this will take 2 hours. And I go off, took 5 hours, but I'm only going to build 2 hours because a lot of that was like, I didn't know how to do that stuff yet. So I went and learned it, and I got paid 2 hours for learning stuff for 5 hours. The next time I do it, it's going to take me 2 hours, maybe an hour and a half or something else. But it's also a way of, like, if you're early on, you can get paid for learning. Just don't bill them for all the learning unless they're really awesome and want to do that for you. And then if they want to do that for you, then by all means, bill them for it. Who gives directions? This is highly important for when you're working with more than one person in the company. So I had one project where it was the home builders one, where they had all the designs for it. That there was the person who was running the company and was giving directions, and then there was the designer who had the designs for some of it. He kept giving me all these, like, all this stuff needs to get fixed. This is off by 4 pixels here. This one needs, the font needs to be changed here. And so this is, I learned from this one, like, the first time around, like, the guy who was running was like, why is this so expensive? Why does it take you so much time? I'm like, well, here's all the list of stuff that I've had being told to do by, this guy is like, replace this. I need to have the drop shadow here. And I was like, no, I don't want to do all that. So it's like, make sure you know who is the one who is paying for it, so you have to understand.
That's who's in charge.
Who's to figure out, like, who are you going to listen to? And if you're like, if you have some of that stuff, you'd be like, oh my God, my son is texting me saying, can I buy something? Like, no. It's so. Some of it is like, make sure you know who is the person that has the real say-so, so you don't have, like, this misimbalance. And so after that, I was always like, we have all these things. This is what it's, gave him a more estimate. Like, this is what it's going to cost to do this. Do you want me to do that? He's like, well, yeah, you can do that one, but, like, don't do the others. Like, it's not worth it. Keeping track of time. Be diligent. You can use a stopwatch. You can use something else. Set time blocks of, like, I'm going to work on this for 30 minutes and then do this, or 15 minutes, whatever it is, so that you don't, like, you focus on that. You don't do anything else. If you are someone who switches and then quit your browser, and then focus on that so you can be sure that, like, I'm billing you for this amount, and this is what you need to do. I usually bill within, like, for 15 minutes for stuff, and I usually just have a spreadsheet. I'm like, okay, I'm starting this and doing this. Here's the timestamp. And then I'll go work, and then I'll come back and like, okay, it was an hour and a half or hour and 15. Then I'll just mark it in that I just did that. I usually also err on the side of the client. Like, sometimes it's like, all right, I did 5 or 6 minutes. Like, I don't care. It's all going to work out in the wash. But if it's like, okay, I did 10 minutes, then okay, I'll probably bill, for extra on that. How to get paid? You got to have a contract. If you don't have a contract, it's going to be hard to get paid. First thing is, send an invoice. What's an invoice? Just basically saying, this is work I've done. This is how much you should pay me. This is, what. So a couple examples. This is one for a client where it's a smaller one, so they needed more details of, like, what did I actually do. So basically, here's the time frame, and here's the descriptions of the things that I actually did. For some of the clients, if they had, like, either GitHub issues or specific whatever ticketing system, I would put the ticketing system in there. Like, hey, I did this. This is how long it took me to do this. This is a meeting that we had. And then here's the total amount, the rate. You can see this is back in 2018. For other people, if you have larger ones, many times it can be just like this. I work 25 hours, you owe me this amount of money. Because they already know that you've done the actual work. It's like, it's very clear from working with them that you have done, from builds, they can see progress on it, you have meetings. They don't need all the details, because all the details are in them. But that's more of like, if you can work it out with them, then you can do that. If you don't have a check yet, like you've sent them an invoice, they haven't paid you yet, call them, get on the phone, have a meeting with them, do something. Because a lot of times in person is harder to ignore than an email. Email many times are like, oh, I don't need to do it right now. And then you can ask them, like, make sure, hey, I sent this invoice. Did you actually get it? Yes, they got it. No, I didn't get it yet. Great. I'm going to send it to you right now and stay on the phone with you. I just sent it to you. Did you get it now? Oh, yes, I see it now. All right, great. If you pay me in 2 weeks, it's already overdue. But mostly just ask, like, what happened. Assume that there's something that was unknown that they just didn't happen. Like, because I had times where it's like they didn't get it, or they got it and then they had some family emergency that happened, and so they weren't able to. And it's like, be understanding about that. But still, if they start paying you, then stop work immediately. Because you shouldn't be doing extra work on the hopes that you're going to get paid for it. Unless you've done a lot of work for them and you know that they eventually will pay you, then, and you want to take that risk, then by all means you can. The other thing you do is if they have a habit of that, or they're like, end up doing, I usually say, and I haven't had many because I usually stop working for people who don't do that. But if they don't do it, then you can say, well, we're going to work on a retainer basis. If you pay me $2,000, then I will work from that $2,000 until you're out of money from that, and then you pay me another $2,000. And I won't do any more work until you pay me more. So basically it's like prepayment for it. And that is a fine way to do it for some people. It works better because they know, like, hey, I paid for this. They have a little more interest in it too. And definitely, like, fire bad clients. It is not worth your time or energy to deal. And sometimes you just have to write off, some amount. I know Wiley, the sub-hack, ended up having a funding issue. And so he had basically stopped work, and he had a contract that said he owned all the stuff, and they couldn't use it until they actually paid him. And so they did eventually pay him because he had that in there. I think if he didn't have that in there, there might have been some more like, oh, we're going to use it. Like, you guys cannot use that. You're a copyright violation. This is my stuff until it goes over to you. And that stuff is really easy to, great, I'll take you to small claims court. We have a document that shows you that I wrote this. Thing right here says I own it until you pay me. You haven't paid me. Let's go. I mean, that's a pretty easy thing to knock through. And most people are like, okay, we'll figure out how to pay you. Taxes, pay them. Pay the estimates, or not. And then just pay the penalties. I've done both. There's a period of time where it's like, I think it's when I had like one of my kids, and I was doing a lot of work, and so it's like, I have no time, I can't figure out how I'm supposed to end, so I'm just going to pay the penalties for it, when it comes time to fill it out. And I figured what the penalties ended up being, like on one time, I think it was like $1,000 of penalties, like totally fine, because I did not have any time, for the first half of the year when we were just like so busy, like I just didn't have the time to sit down and figure it out. So I'll pay the penalty on it. But usually you should pay the estimates. It's pretty easy to pay. Write down what you actually paid so you can remember that you actually paid it. And then I usually save whatever I bill for. I just take 30% and either save it and prepay a bunch of it so that I actually have it. Don't wait until the end. Make sure you save it out because it will come due unless you have something else. Quick clear on C Corp, LLC, sole proprietor. This is where you should go talk to, a tax accountant, or some CPA, somebody who can help you advise you a little bit more on that. A lot of differences is there's some different tax differences. There's also a legal entity of like whether you're working for yourself and people are paying the money to you, or like with a C Corp. I've done a C Corp before where people would pay the corporation, and then we hired two people, me and my friend, who we worked for the corporation, but we basically we did it as a consulting, like however much money you brought in, you could then do a payroll anytime you wanted for whatever that amount was. Or if you needed to expense stuff by the company, then we could just buy stuff directly. And then we had basically did the end of taxes for it. I think it really depends on also the number of people, and for the legal, sometimes there's an LLC. This is where it gets into go talk to a lawyer too. That yes, it'll protect you more, maybe, because there's also enough of like, if you're the only person and you're the one who's basically misbehaving, an LLC is not going to protect you from the misbehaving on the contract of it. Even though it is a separate legal entity, there are many times where like that will not, they'll still be able to go after you. Another thing I didn't say, if you are doing this kind of stuff and you have any kind of assets, make sure you get like an umbrella insurance policy. They're very cheap to have. They basically cover you for like $1 million or $2 million up and above all your other insurances, and is a good kind of thing just to have in case someone does come after you for something. They'll usually go after your insurance, and then your insurance can handle it, and then probably settle with them. 1099 versus W-2, it's who pays the taxes on it. 1099 means they're paying you directly, you have to pay the taxes. W-2, they're usually paying the taxes for you. A lot of times they'll pay you less on that because they're paying the taxes on something. Sometimes if you can get it on W-2 and they're paying it, then take it because they're going to hopefully pay a lot of the extra taxes you normally do. But again, it depends on, like, you're like, oh, we'll do W-2, but we're going to charge you a lot less. It's like, we'll figure it out. Does it actually work for you or not? Getting rid of clients. Make sure you have other, contracts to go work on, or, if it's like you really don't like them, then just don't do it and go find something else. It kind of depends on your position. If you're doing it just on the side versus you're doing it for your full-time job. I usually, anytime your quality of life goes down, then it's time to drop them and do something else. Quality of life being like, just working with them is such a pain, or they're either demanding or they're not fun. When you have meetings with them, like it's not the kind of meeting where they're professional or you feel good about it. Or people who pay, I just don't deal with that. Getting rid of clients. Many times, hey, let you know that I have this other contract, I'm going to be doing this, I'm going to be stopping after this set available time, I'll have this, we'll close it out. If you have, I can't do your work anymore, and this is where you can say like, I can't do your work, and I don't know anybody else who could work on it right now, they're all too busy too. It depends on how much you like it. Or if it's like, I can't work on this, I know someone who would love to work on this, let me go send it to them. And if they say, well, how can we keep you? You can be specific about, well, I need my rate to go up to this, I need you guys to stop having these meetings that I hate, or I need you guys to stop sending me these emails and ask me all this stuff because it doesn't work, and then I can't actually build anything. So if you're very specific about it, and if you get those things and it works, then keep going for it. Otherwise, say bye-bye. Emergency fund. If you're doing it full-time, highly recommend having one, doing it in a large emergency fund. I did this full-time with having kids, and so a lot of it was like, this is what we're living off of. So if we're not actually having money, then we need to have emergency funds so that when in between contracts or when it's lower, that we'll eat away at the emergency fund, and then as soon as it goes back up, then you build it back up. We actually did I think 3 months of salary that we had that we basically put away. It's in just a savings account that is easily accessible. It's not in anything that we have to sell, or it's just, and we earn no real interest on it. But the whole point isn't to earn interest on it. It's to when like, okay, this company just stopped, they're no longer able to do stuff anymore, and this other one just stopped at the same time, I have no money coming in. It takes, like, you can't immediately just go out and get a contract. If you do, it'll take 2 weeks or a month before you can bill for it. So I recommend, this is also your own risk factor. If you feel risky and you have no things, then don't have one. But I recommend having a large one. When can you start consulting? Right now. You can start freelancing right now. You don't even have to know anything. You just have to be able to find someone and say, yes, I'll do the work for you, and have a deadline either far enough out in advance that you can learn it and then build it and then ship it to them by the time they want it, or you already know what it is. And totally fine way to do it. And I recommend it, if you're someone who's interested in learning, you can find someone who's like, hey, I'll build that for you. When do you need it? October? No problem. And then actually start doing it so you can build it for them. Other question is when do you add a backend API? There's a lot of stuff you can use if they don't have some backend already for doing the data. Firebase, Heroku, Airtable. There's a ton of different stuff you can basically use to store data, store some of the things on there. Usually it's for smaller ones, it's do they have a budget for it to hire someone else, or if you do it yourself, to hire you to actually do that part of it. Otherwise, don't do it. Last note, I definitely find it's a balancing act. The hardest thing I've had is usually with if you have larger clients, like when I was doing, because I actually was freelancing at Hydro for 20 hours a week, and then at Kaleidoscape for 20 hours a week. And usually it'd be it was pretty good. Some weeks it'd be more like 50 hours, and some it'd be 35 to 40 hours. But the problem is when they were okay, we both have this deadline right at the same time, and we both need to do lots of work. It's I can't work that much, and I found that to be really hard. It's just making sure, it's a skill to kind of say, I can't do it then, but can we push that date out by a week? Because I'm already doing this other stuff. And the other part, this is when it can be, hard sometimes. You always have to be finding clients. You always have to find people. Always have to work on it. Otherwise, you just don't have the pipeline coming in. Because a lot of times it's you have something, be a ton of work, and then stop, and they're done with it, and they're moving on to something else. Some other ones the one I've had for with SOMFM has just been a consistent but low amount. So you can just keep trying to find this stuff. And I think the best part of it is always be learning, because whatever you're doing stuff on now is not the same thing you're going to be doing in the future. So always be learning, look this new stuff that's coming out, because then you can actually help other people out with it. Last thing I was going to say is just something I've been working on is I've taught kids how to do programming, ages 11 to 14, for the last 20 years during the summer. And so I've actually just been writing a book about, because basically people keep saying, hey, I'd like to teach my kid, or I have someone who I'd like to teach basic programming to. Can you tell me how to do it? I'm no. So I started it 12 years ago. I looked at or maybe 15 years ago. I looked at the documents like, wow, I started writing this that long ago, and I never finished it. So I finally was like, I'm going to finish it. So I've actually just finished it, and then what I'm mostly interested in, if anybody is interested in either reviewing or they have someone they'd like to try it out, that's mostly what I'm interested in, is trying to get some people to try things out for it. And now we're at the Q&A. So I've done an awful lot of talking. Does anybody have questions they'd like to ask or anything about anything? Yes?
Hey, Chris, you heard the analogy of when you're pricing stuff out of like a car.
Yeah.
It asks you, okay, do you want a base model Chevy or do you need a Cadillac? And think about how much those things cost.
Yeah.
And features. Oh, you guys want to custom this or whatever.
Yeah.
And there's some websites out there that you can tell a client, tap through these particular things, and that'll give you a rough guess about, $5K here, $4K, for that, and it's very helpful.
That's it. I haven't used any of those. I do know, like, a lot of times it's like, if they have a sense of it, if they can tell me kind of a description and like how much, I can tell them roughly like, okay, that sounds like 15K, or that's going to be like 30K, or okay, maybe 5K if you don't do any of this other stuff and it's very simple, but a lot of times you can give them like, and if they say like, oh, that's why I always ask like, what's your budget on it? Do you know what your budget is? Do you have a budget? If you don't have a budget, I probably don't want to work. I might like you might be a good friend, but I don't want to work for you. Other questions? That's the way. Yes?
Well, what's your opinion on subcontracting a subcontract?
Totally fine as long as the clients know that you're working on it, are going to do it that way. And many times, that's how we did some of the stuff with, like when I was working with Justin, with Weagles. He was the one who had the contract to do both apps, and he would subcontract out to me for that one. I think there might have been a couple others where I was the main one because I knew the people first, and then subcontract out to him. I told him it's totally fine to do. You just have to be clear with like people that you're doing it, because it can have some dependencies like, oh, this other person isn't no longer available, and you're still on the hook to deliver it, and you can't do it. But when I was working with Justin, like we both knew each other, been friends for a long time. We have, we're not doing it full time, so we're not picking anything that like requires tons amount of time, so we know that we can be able to do it. And we also showed each other kind of like we're consistent in being able to deliver stuff. Yeah.
Online marketplaces like Fiverr, Upwork, TopTal. Any experience with those? Any opinions on those?
So I haven't put stuff up there. There was one that was local. Gunner? No, was it Gun.io?
Yeah.
They were a Nashville company that I can't remember. I don't know if they're still around, but they were doing stuff for a while. And a lot of times I find on there like either what they want is they want something at like a ridiculously low price, and it's too hard to be able to do that. Like for the Gun.io one, like there were some stuff that I didn't actually get something there because I ended up getting contracts other places while I was searching, and then I didn't have any time. And a lot of times you see the proposal from like, I want to totally duplicate Facebook, I want to do all this stuff, $500. You're like, good luck, maybe you can find someone to do that. I don't want to do that. But I know some other people, there's certain ones, and I would ask around to see who else has done it. But my experience for a lot of them is that it's hard to find, like, the people who are using some of those don't want to pay for a lot of stuff. Now, if you have, like, smaller things like, hey, I just want to fix some things, put that up there, you can probably start to make a business off some of that. But for, like some of the stuff that I've done, it's like, okay, this is probably going to be like $35,000 to build this whole thing out. Like most of them aren't going to use that. They want to have more background for what you've actually done.
Great point.
Yeah.
How do you go about kind of sizing up the scope or like figuring out like you mentioned back in briefly. I think in my head a lot of times I think they probably want you to create the database and this and that and all that, but it looks like you're also like adding to existing like adding a feature to an existing like database or.
So is your question like how do you size up when you have a database stuff?
Or? Well, I guess my main question is: are you normally just like building front end code and it works with whatever existing APIs they have, making that call from the front end?
I'd say probably like 75 to 80% of the time that's what it is. There's another one where like there's one company in local who wanted to do this prototype app. They were kind of competing with or wanted to compete with DraftKings, so they wanted this drafting, but they just wanted me to do it all. So I ended up doing the whole database using Firebase, to store all of it, and then just, because it was really easy to put all the NFL data and the real-time stuff in there, and be able to have, like, when people pick their things, stored in there as a separate table. And it's that kind of thing where it's easy to add in, especially if they don't really have a huge budget for it. But a lot of times, depending on the level of it, a lot of the stuff I work with, they either already have an existing API that they're doing stuff with, or they have someone else who's doing the back-end API. So a lot of times they'll be like, oh, we're at a company, we already have people who are doing the dev for the, like the Kaleidoscape. They had a full dev team, because they already have a full website that has all the stuff. They're basically just, there's already JSON that was exposed for movies and be able to search for all of it. We would just work with them, they would do that component of it, and we basically say, okay, this API doesn't work, can you build it in this way? And be like, oh yeah, we can change it, or give you a new API that does that stuff. Or like when we did some of their payment and notifications, it's like, well, this is how notifications need to work, so can you set this up for it? And then they set it up. We kind of like specify what we wanted. But most of the time, it's I do stuff that other people, an API that other people have, that we're just writing something to, or I'm writing something to. Or sometimes, like with the Misalu, there was no API, it was the hardware product, so we're actually just talking to the hardware, so there's no API or any of it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about, you and Justin were working native.
Yeah.
You said the evil word cross-platform.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, this is, again, it's not the truth, it's my own opinion. I love working in native stuff. I actually find it, I've done a ton of React Native. Matter of fact, at Hydro, most of the initial stuff was React Native. I actually didn't go there full-time initially, because I was like, if I go full-time and working on React Native full-time, I'm going to go insane. And I will not want to do that. So I know you guys want to hire me. You've made an offer full-time. I don't want it. I'll work half-time. And then I only went there full-time because I got to hire John, and then we actually did a native app in it. So my experience with a lot of it is it works well for certain types of apps, or works well for certain types of things that you're trying to build, or certain aspects of it. You can totally do the cross-platform of it. But a lot of times when you either have a custom part that you want, or it's something a little bit more not fancy, but like you want it to be smoother, or for something, like you have to do it in native to get some of the same stuff. And then the other big problem is like, for most of the cross-platforms, the whole idea is like, oh, write once, run anywhere, but it's usually write once, debug everywhere. So there's always like, okay, it doesn't work here because of this. Oh, we have to add in custom. And if you start looking at the actual code for it, it ends up being, okay, we have this nice view, but then we have an if-def up here for iOS, and we have an if-def thing down here for Android, and we have another if-def up here for the Mac. And you're like, now at this point, it would have been much easier just to write the native one rather than having all this stuff. And the other big problem I had with it too is like when we were at Hydro, they had a lot of, because they were doing React Native, so they had a lot of people who knew like JavaScript and to be able to write JavaScript for it. But a lot of the issues were in like third-party libraries that are written in native code, and so you have to have someone who knows how to actually, like, so I ended up fixing a lot of the Bluetooth code, which was issues in the native libraries. And the only reason I knew how to do that is because I'm an iOS developer, I've actually written a lot of stuff. I was like, I know I'm fixing all this stuff, I'd rather not fix it and just rewrite it, because there's so many bugs in how it's actually done, it'd be faster if I rewrite it. But if you want, I can just keep fixing it. And like, we'll keep fixing it, and it ended up being a lot of work. I mean, it really would have been faster to do it the other way. And that's the problem that you usually have is, if you have something that also has some of the lower levels of you needing third-party libraries, then you need someone who actually knows enough about that to actually be really experienced. And the really experienced people, most of the time, do not want to work on, half, JavaScript, half native stuff, just because, you're like, oh, I was using this really nice Xcode, now I have to go to this other IDE where I can't set a breakpoint, I can't actually debug anything, I can't, do any memory tracking. Like, the first version of the Hydro stuff, like, we would leak 1 megabyte a minute of memory. And I spent a bunch of time on it, and we could not figure out where in the JavaScript stack it was leaking. And so we ended up just like, we have enough memory, we can last 45 minutes, and at the end we're just going to quit the app and restart it, and now I didn't really memory leaks. But I mean, I've done tons of like memory profiling, I've done a lot of stuff. It was just like, it's so frustrating. Like, I found some stuff and fixed some things, and so it was leaking like 4.5 megabytes a minute. So we got it down to 1. We're like, okay, we can last for, you do a whole workout, which is 60 minutes, and you can be able to do that. If you did 2 of those in a row, you're in trouble.
Piggybacking on Paul's question though,
Yeah.
like, is there a lot of, especially with consulting and that initial conversation, is it like talking people off the ledge across platform, or how often are people just like, I want you to build what you build and however you build it?
So it depends on, I've had like, probably all across the board. There's a lot of times like, we want to build a native app, come build this for it. Or like Classic, we want to build an app, what do you recommend building it in? I recommend building it in this way, Or other people like, who we'll talk to is like, I really want to do this, I want to do this across platform, I'm going to do it in Flutter. It's like, okay, I'm not the person to do that. You should go talk someone else in. Or sometimes, people are like, I really want it in this way. It's like, well, why? It's like, because I've heard that that's the best thing to do. It's like, okay, well, you can go do that. Here's going to be some of the problems with it, or you can find someone who can do that better for you. And I've had somewhere like they talked, and I basically talked them out of it. Like, okay, I don't. Again, I think it's fine for some of the stuff. You can totally build great stuff with it. There's a lot of good stuff built with it, but it's not what I want to work on. And I've done enough work. Like I've written and consulted in lots of different languages, and everybody's like, oh, it's easy. There's always a context switch between whatever you're working on. And I have found even if you're doing like 2, or if you're doing 3, like you have to do iOS, Android, and JavaScript for some of it, there's just huge context, and there's so much stuff out there, even just for one platform. I mean, I don't know if anybody is just like an iOS developer. Many times you're like, there are so many things out there, I don't even know what all these are at all. And now you're multiplying that by 3 of like how much stuff is out there. So I find it hard to do. I mean, I built stuff in React. I mean, the whole first 6 months or whatever, Hydro's React Native.
And I'm not going to. Anybody else have any other questions before I ask a
anybody else have a question you want to ask?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever had a client where you've had to sell them on taking 2 steps backwards in order to slingshot 5 steps forward, in terms of like going back and redoing something in order to be able to do it better the next time?
I think, but I know I've had some stuff where it's like, I know you want to. So there's one where they had I originally loved the idea. It was an app to do like for soccer managers to be able to put people on the field. The app was pretty nice, and they had someone who had been working on it, but they weren't sure how well that person was actually doing it. There seemed to be some real questions about it, so they're bringing in someone else to basically kind of look at what they're doing, because the other person, and I think the other person realized they were about to get fired, so they ended up quitting. And so I took a look at this stuff, and I was like, oh, they want to. This is what I'm like. The estimations for what it actually is. It's like, all right, you just have this thing in here where you have a drop-down list of, you've gone to the screen, you have a drop-down list of the soccer players, and you just want to pick it, and then it populates it. And you just want it to be sorted in this other order. That seems really easy. Turns out super hard, because the way that it was coded, like when I first got into it, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is really bad. It was like code of someone who had not really been, they definitely were not a senior engineer, and had never had someone actually look at it or review stuff. So I did a lot of things that, anybody who had actually done or shipped apps before would be like, what are you doing? So they had data structures that were all dictionaries, and they were all arrays, and there are no actual types of anything. And so they know, based on, well, because you have this selected, it's a dictionary, and the names in this, or it's an array, and each thing is actually, the first thing in the array is this object. And we only know that because it's we know what this other thing is. And we're also going to propagate that down through like 5 levels and reach down into like the very low one and pick out the third item in the array, because we know what should be there, and then pull that back out. It's like, I don't want to touch this. Like, I'm afraid like I'm just changing one thing here. I don't know who else is, reaching in through all of it to like, I can fix it. It's going to take me longer, and we should really try to, like, instead of, like, I'll fix this little part and try to clean it up some. But it was definitely the worst of, like, I know you really want to do all that stuff. It's not going to be possible with what you currently have.
It's how many people here saw the movie Fargo? Remember that movie?
Oh, yeah.
And about the clear code?
Yeah, is your friend
okay. Well, I'm just thinking of things like unit tests, UI tests, those types of things. A lot of entrepreneurs don't want to spend that extra for that kind of thing. Do you ever advocate for it?
I do for usually a couple parts. So there's some where if you're doing certain things that you either have like I've done it for like date formatters or things that are parsing some data, that it's much easier to do a unit test for it, to actually have all the, to be able to iterate over, here's all the different things I need to support, than to, okay, I've written it and now I need to go run through it manually to try hit, the different parts in the app to be able to do it to see did I format it right. It's so much easier for that just to write a unit test. They're like, okay, you're getting this data, did I actually display it in the right way? So that's the stuff where I like definitely do for it. And then some of it, it really gets down to like what do you want to test for and why. And a lot of times the smaller companies, they don't even know if they want to keep this at all, so a lot of times unit testing isn't something that's worthwhile to do because they might just write this one thing and then throw it away. And then for some of the stuff when you get larger, it's like, if you're unit testing, are you trying to test that it works with the backend? Like, did the backend API change? So does it need to be a live one? Most of them haven't done a lot of UI testing. It hasn't been until like you get a little larger that when you have, and it's actually a larger project too, that when you make changes, you want to make sure you didn't break some other stuff. And I've usually found a lot of times is like, when the things start getting broken repeatedly over builds, that's the time that you usually start adding in unit test or more UI testing. So it's like, okay, you guys have broken this every single time. So right now we're going to actually add UI tests for this set of things so that we know for certain at least you didn't break logging in again, which is happening. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you kind of work with friends and people you've known for a while. And how do you kind of decide where to draw the line of what's giving a friend advice and what's officially consulting?
Good question. I usually say, if you take me out and buy me lunch, if you want to buy me lunch over, I happily tell you anything over that hour and a half for any stuff. Like, no problem. You can buy me multiple lunches because I like chatting. If you're going to buy me lunch and we'll go to this place, sure, I'll happily chat. Give it over whatever advice you want.
Conversations
if you want
are
like
for
fooding during the middle of
money.
it, then that might start to be a little suspect. But I don't mind doing a lot, or even just like there's certain people who have like asked questions, and it's usually like if they want to get into how can I build this, or I think is usually the line of like, can you design it? How can you give like lots of thoughts of like, what do you think about this? Is a great idea? I'm like, no, that's a bad idea. Please don't do that at all. Or like, that's a really good idea. You should try it out. Can I get it built for this amount? No, I think it's going to cost you a lot more than that. Or,
Do you find you run into that even like any kind of client where you're kind of laying out the scope of work without giving away your ideas?
That like I'm doing that or they're doing that?
You're doing that in a sense where it's like, if they say, what's it going to take to do this? And you have to lay out like, okay, well, I'm doing all these things here.
What do you mean by like not giving away?
Like, what needs to be done?
Oh, no, because, I mean, mostly I know a lot of how to build a lot of stuff, and a lot of times they'll hire me because I can help put that together really well. I mean, for a lot of the full-time jobs and stuff I do, I end up doing a lot of like systems work or architecture work or, hey, mostly like my main role for a lot of startups is like, we have this thing. We have no idea how to build it. Can we get it done in 3 months? I'm like, sure. And then I go off and figure out how to put all this stuff together or whatever. So that's my specialty. Like at Hydro, we had, we have this thing, it's an Android tablet. We need to install software on it. We can't use Google Play because we don't have Google services, it's not a Google-approved device. Okay, we need that in 3 months. So it's like, okay, let's figure out what we do. So then had to go actually figure out how do you install, how do you actually override some of the stuff, how do you become a privileged app, how do you install yourself as a launcher app, design like a way to deliver software. And so, I mean, that's the kind of stuff I do there. But for most other people, like the stuff I end up paying for, like some of that architecture stuff, you can just tell people about it. Or some of it's like, I can tell you how to do it, but if, what you pay me for is actually the doing of it. So I don't mind at all like telling people how to do stuff or giving that part away. I think the only things like that be secretive is more of like, if you have some idea for an app that is, or service that's really interesting that you want to keep. But I've usually found even with that, many times it's much better to tell people about stuff that you're doing, because you will find out that someone else is either, could be a really good partner for you on that you would never know if you hadn't actually just been talking about it. So, because many times it's in the execution of it. Like the ideas, I mean, I've been in startups for a long time. Like the ideas a lot of times, like, a lot of people have the same ideas. It's how well can you execute on it rather than like some secret part about it.
Chris,
yes,
I walked out briefly. Did you talk about NDAs and that kind of stuff?
No. So a lot of times in the contract, usually have like, all the stuff is privileged information. I have signed a lot of NDAs. The ones I usually don't sign, and I have not signed for some of them, is where it's like you will not then do work, like anything that limits where I can do work for other people on stuff, I just don't sign them and say, sorry, I can't sign them. But a lot of those people will then, they'll have, like, a lot of times they're using just a generic NDA agreement, and there's a specific one that basically says, we have this specific information. We're going to tell you. You promise not to tell anybody else unless we've also told other people. And then I was like, I'll sign that one. I won't tell anybody about any of the stuff I'm working on. So a lot of times I've had some where it's like, I forget what it was. There's one where I was like, and you will not do any work with this stuff anywhere for 5 years. I'm like, you guys are ridiculous. Like, there's no way I'm signing that.
Handcuffs.
How about we have this? Here's another example. They're like, oh yeah, we'll sign that one. I'm like, okay, good. It's like, I'll tell you secrets, you tell me secrets. I won't tell anybody else until, it's public knowledge kind of thing. I have no problem signing those. Matter of fact, it's kind of funny. I used to, when I was living in California, we had 4 of us living in a house, and at one point, like, we were either at different, like the original Replay TV, which is long back before, one of the people at our house was one of the main engineers on it. So like at our house, we actually had to have you sign an NDA for some of the stuff just to come in our house. We had so much, like from the 4 people who were all in tech, we had so many different like pre-beta stuff that was in there that you could basically, you'd walk in, you're like, I've never seen this before. Because it doesn't exist anywhere yet. We have, this pre-beta stuff that you can't see anywhere else. So that was kind of fun. Yeah, and we do like friend NDA.
When I worked for a consultancy in a different vertical, we, multiple people in the shop, so we'd get a client, we would sort of light them up with a base camp, and we would tell them this is how we would kind of systematize them into our system.
Yeah.
When you're just sort of a 1 or 2 man shop, are you bringing them into that sort of thing? Are you saying, hey, I'm going to light you up on Asana, here's my standard contract, here's all my stuff, you're going to communicate through me this way, or do you just sling emails back and forth?
Usually, it's kind of evolved over since I've done it, where some have been like email, or we have, some of them, this is way back then, we'd have a Skype where everybody was in the same Skype channel, because that's all we had back then. Now, a lot of times it's like, oh, it's a Slack channel for the company. Like, there's one point where it's like, I don't know how many Slacks I was in. I was like, all right, this is ridiculous, like having to, but you have to also make sure, like, okay, I'm not going to answer all these stuff until I'm actually billing time for it, because you don't want to, it's hard to do that. Sometimes you answer questions, but I did for a lot of times have, like, for a lot of the smaller ones, like, I have a standard contract. I also have a standard, way we can keep track of things. I forget, I was using, I don't remember what I was using now, but I had one where it's like, I've used this one. If you don't have anything already, this is what I recommend doing. Like, here's the contract. Gotcha. If you have one that you want, I need to see what it is before I can sign it, or if you just want this one, we can sign it. We can do the stuff this way. And then I also had like a lot of like, I built similar apps. So I'm going to install, like, I'm going to recommend, if you have specific things, otherwise, like the initial set of stuff was, I'm going to install it, I'm going to install IG List Kit, I'm going to install Alamo Fire. Like, these are the set of things for, this is how I do lists, this is how I do the data API, this is how I do this, and, I had all that stuff, so it made it really easy to, someone wanted something, I could build it fast. Just because it's, there's not a lot that's different between them. It's like, oh, we have an API call. Yeah, it's the same as all these other ones, and once you are able to build that, then it's a lot easier to do and maintain. But a lot of times there'll be, like when I was working with Kaleidoscape, they had their own ticketing system that they had to use. And they had Perforce that we had to actually work with. So, and we were able to actually switch them over to, halfway through moving over to GitLab, which they had a private hosted GitLab. It was much nicer. We were so happy about being able to do that, just because their ticketing system from before was just awful and a real pain to work with. Yeah.
Do you have any like boilerplate code that you carry from other projects? Or
yes.
Is it something you write that into contracts that you do?
I don't usually write into contracts. I usually talk with people that, hey, there's stuff that I've written that, it's in other projects, and there's certain things like I'll write and I'll put in and say, no copyright, kind of like put a free thing in it, and then I'll include that. And so I don't bill them for any of the time of it. And so once I've written it, or sometimes like I keep doing this, I'm going to write it once on my own time, and then I can just use it. There's a whole series, I forget, like there's some string stuff, and there's some like converting colors from hexadecimal to not. It's like, okay, I either know the gist that I can go copy from every single time, or I've written my own, and some of it's out there. So there's a lot of stuff that, or the other thing too is for a lot of the consulting work, if I want to, it's like, how did I do that? I open up another project and look at it. I don't copy like the whole thing, but it's very easy once you know the structure of how you're actually doing it to like, oh yeah, that's how I did it. Then you can redo it, and then it'll look similar but not identical. But there are, I forget which ones I have. There's like definitely a series of files that I've like done so many times, like I got sick of. Like, okay, I'm writing this. This is no copyright. Anybody can use it, and I'm including it here because I'm sick of having to rewrite this because I didn't do that before. But it's a lot of similar things that end up being able to use, or just the referencing back so you can figure out what did you actually do. Other questions? Yeah.
I did some contracting back in 2009 to 11, and back then, like if you could spell Objective-C, you could name your price.
Yes.
How is the market these days? So like I've had a lot of friends who like work. I had a lot of friends who are contractors, and over the years, all of us wind up with full-time jobs and whatever. And you're still doing it through the whole period.
Yeah, I haven't done the full-time for 4 years. Actually 3 years, because I did it at half Hydro and half Kaleidoscape, and then a couple others then. So I haven't done it in the last 3 years or whatever full-time. I still do some part-time, but so I can't really say like, is it changed in the last little bit, but my experience has usually been there's lots of work that's out there for, is your question more like for Objective-C or just in general?
Just how has the market changed in the last 12 years or whatever it is, like since iOS came out? I feel like the big contract, like because back then it was ridiculous, right? Like nobody could like work for like IBM, and like IBM couldn't know how to do their own project. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, I still find that there's plenty of stuff that's out there, because a lot of times people either they don't want to hire a full-time person because they don't want to have that on their expenses. It's kind of like, we don't want to have a full-time person for our company dedicated just to this. Either our app isn't that complicated, so it's going to be like, look like this and then like this. And so they don't want to hire someone because if they hire someone, they work and enjoy it, and then they quit here, and then they have to hire someone else. So, and I think it's also, there's still lots of smaller ones, but some of those people just want a website more, or some website with a back end, and they don't actually really need an app. They can be able to be served much better from that. So a lot of times I'll talk with people like, are you sure you really need an app for this? Everything you've talked so far just sounds like you can do it with the website. Like I don't see what you need the app for yet. But there still are a lot of people I found that do need it or want to work on it.
If I can piggyback on that, how do you decide if like a tool like a WordPress or something? There's so many templates and templating services out there. How do you know that you're taking full advantage of the best tools out there, and how do you size up all that?
I think one of the things is you have to take an opinion and then go with it, and then know that it might not be 100% whatever it is, and then just say, this is what I've used, it's worked well for that. And then also that whole part of like continuing to learn, like just make sure you are always like, all right, I've used this one before, let me explore and try out this other one and see how it is. So as many times I'll be like, all right, let me try out this other stuff. And like, no, that was not good. It did not work well. That was a mistake. Or like I'll have like a smaller project that just I want to try it out. So I'll spend time kind of investigating. I think we're close to end. Randy.
Yeah. Any other last questions? Christopher is on the Nashville Cocoaheads Slack, so I'm sure if you guys join that, I'll put the slide back up where you can see that. You can ask any more questions, but any last parting questions before we end for the night?
And I'm always happy to chat about stuff. I think it came out just because someone was asking questions in there, and so I started answering. I think, Chris was like, "Oh, that's really interesting. How about this?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, that." He's like, "You should do a talk on it." I'm like, "I guess I could." I know. Maybe I have enough stuff to say.
Similarly, if you too have something to say, we would love to hear from you at a Cocoaheads talk. So,
Guys, let's thank Chris for his time.
Thank you.